We focused on the space debris issue now because in my opinion, the biggest risk to the space economy right now. And so we need to tackle it. And we hear a lot about space debris, space junk, all that. But I'm not seeing action forward. And that's what I would like to do with the center is push it to action. Let's get this done. How do we do it? Let's get everybody in the same room. Let's move forward. We don't want to talk about it. We want to move forward.
Hey, SpaceWatchers, this is Space Café Radio, your channel about trends, awesome events, and interesting people in the space sector. During my visit of the Connecting the World from the Skies conference in Riyadh in November 2024, I had the chance to meet with Mishaal Ashemimry, the Managing Director of the Center for Future Space. Join us as we talk about the critical issue of space debris and its impact on the space economy. In this engaging episode, we also discuss the center's mission, which includes policy and regulatory measures, space technology advancement, and cross-sector collaboration. Learn about their unique position with the network of the World Economic Forum's Fourth Industrial Revolution Centers and their global vision for space sustainability. I'm Thorsten, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. Lean back and enjoy this episode. Hey, SpaceWatchers, and welcome back in Riyadh. I have the great pleasure today to visit the Saudi Space Agency and to meet with Mishaal Ashemimry, Managing Director of the Center for Space Future. How are you doing, Mishaal?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Let's start. The Center of Space Futures is positioned as an upcoming global leader in the space innovation and collaboration. Could you share some primary goals for the center and how they align with its overarching vision for the future of space exploration and technology?
Absolutely. The Center for Space Futures is a collaboration between the Saudi Space Agency and the World Economic Forum, and it's the only center that is focused on space out of the network of C4IR centers, which are the Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution with the WEF. So our center is mainly focused on space, and it's the only center within that network that is focused on space. Our goal and our target is the space economy. And how we look at the space economy is to ensure its growth and sustainability. How do we do that? Through three priorities. The first one is policy and regulatory. So this is looking at the policies and regulatories in space that can safeguard against risking the space economy. For example, when you look at space debris, that's a risk to the space economy. These are some of the topics that we will address. And as a matter of fact, on the 25th of November, during the NTN, we had a workshop where we brought in industry experts as well as agencies and government institutions, research institutions from across the world. About 12 countries participated to tackle de-risking the space economy with a focus on space debris to try to see how can we move forward. These are some of the topics that fall under policy and regulatory. We can also look at what will happen in the future when we go to the moon. There are a lot of gaps in space policy and regulatory that need to grow at the pace of technology and activities in space. The second element that we focus on is space technology. And our role is to understand what technologies could open up the space economy. And in doing so, we spotlight certain technologies and create like a marketplace for investors and these technology developers to meet each other and push this technology to a higher maturity. So these are technologies that can open up the space economy and in turn open up opportunities to grow the maturity of innovation in space. The third element is cross-sector collaboration, which is essentially looking at non-space sectors, capitalizing on their expertise to bring them into the space sector. In doing so, you're giving them access to the space economy and opening it up as well.
That sounds very interesting from the diversity of themes that you're tackling in it. When you talk about policy, for instance, and also the technology aspect, is it something you focus as a center on the Saudi economy or really on a broader global space ecosystem?
No, so the center is positioned as a global center, meaning our target is the entire space community, not locally. So in other words, local contributors can obviously be our target, but overall, we are targeting the space community as a whole, which is obviously very global and international. And one of the key elements of the center is that it is an impartial center, meaning we don't really have an agenda. Our goal is to benefit all space actors and space players.
It's interesting. So you mentioned the center is not just one-off. It is part of a community, of a set of centers that the WEF initiated, right?
Yes. So the World Economic Forum has a network of centers, each of which has a different theme or subject that they focus on. Some are in AI, some are in agriculture, some are in quantum computing. And so different centers have different things. Some are in advanced manufacturing. Ours is the only one that's focused on space and is intended to be a global center that brings and bridges the gaps between potentially other coordinations globally when it comes to space.
You mentioned space debris and the workshop you just have conducted. Will we see then also Saudi being active in space debris mitigation, removal, or is that not on the agenda? Is it just a study for humanity?
And with our center, the focus of the study is for all space players, which includes Saudi. But also Saudi earlier this year hosted the Space Debris Conference. And at that conference, the goal is to create a trend, and that Saudi, even though they don't have a lot of assets in space, they're planning to do so in a sustainable manner from the get-go.
I see. And you mentioned the moon, but just on the policy side, the title of the center includes exploration, if I'm not mistaken. Is moon as a first step in space exploration something that's also or will be on the agenda? On the technology side, you mentioned just the policy angle.
Absolutely. The policy, the moon, and the entire space economy, whether near Earth or in cislunar space or beyond that, is within the realm of what we do. The reason why we focus on the moon, obviously, because there's going to be a lot of activities in the next decade targeting the moon. And part of that is going to be commercializing aspect, whether it's in-space fuel depots, water extraction on the moon, or storing fuels, or capitalizing on some of the resources on the moon. All of those fall under either one of the focus areas that we have, which is policy, or the innovation part, which is the space technology.
What you're conducting will be then studies, guidelines, or what is the outcome that I can envision?
Absolutely. So 3 things. The first one is obviously publications. So for example, our workshop that's focused on de-risking the space economy with a focus on space debris, the outcome of that is going to be a published paper with a recommendation based on the findings that we have, which include a research plus the outcome from these workshops, which we will have. We had one and we will have a second one at the beginning of next year. And so that is a product that we would put out as a published paper that makes recommendations. And then we would need to get endorsement or agreement from the space community to some extent that they do agree with these, and perhaps they can move on to mandating it. The second portion, which is the space technology piece, there's 2 elements. It is a paper that highlights what are the technologies we think in the next decade can open up the space economy, but also the second element of that is bringing in a marketplace where investors and these technologies meet so that they can push the technology to a higher maturity level. When you do that, that then pushes that technology, and that's an outcome, even though we're not necessarily developing the technology itself, but we're pushing it to get to where it needs to be. With a cross-sector collaboration, which also feeds into the moon, is, for example, looking at expertise that is well-defined terrestrially and how can we use it in space. So, for example, I've had conversations with advanced manufacturing companies and even the Advanced Manufacturing Center in the US as part of the WEF. And we discussed, wait a minute, advanced manufacturing can apply directly to the moon. And therefore, you're opening their eyes to, oh my God, I can actually use my capabilities here and access the moon, and in doing so, benefit from it. Another example is mining. Mining on Earth is well defined. There's a lot of expertise. You can bring in the mining industry to space and give them access to space. So these are the different ways that we can essentially create pilot projects in this respect when it comes to the cross-sector collaboration.
Let's talk about you. You're a pioneer in this field of space engineering and absolutely a role model for aspiring professionals. So how has your journey from an aerospace engineer to your leadership role shaped your approach to directing this groundbreaking center?
I come from a highly technical background. So as an aerospace engineer, my focus has always been on rockets, spacecraft, and emerging technologies in space. I've worked on developing nuclear thermal rockets for NASA Marshall in the past. I've also designed space nuclear power and propulsion. I've designed rockets to go to space. I've designed rockets for defense. So it's a lot of technical expertise there, but also understanding the full spectrum of how to create a roadmap for specific technologies and how they can be utilized and how do you apply them and how can they open up exploration in space. I've done that many times before, especially with emerging technologies in space, because they're emerging and you need to make sure that they're cross-cutting, meaning whatever technology you develop, how can I use it in different systems? And so these types of things are essentially what I do or what I did. And so that helps a lot. I also started my own rocket company. So from a leadership perspective, I went through having many hats, starting my own company, being the engineer, the one that runs the company, the one that has to create a business plan and so forth. And so that played a lot into the leadership capabilities that I have. Coming to Saudi, initially I came as a consultant and an advisor to the CEO of the Saudi Space Agency to help develop the space ecosystem in Saudi and the strategy. And from there, moved into this particular role.
That's fascinating. And again, I think you're a role model for many people here in the region. Let's talk about the future prospects. So what specific milestones or breakthroughs do you hope the center will achieve in the next 5 years? And how do you see its role evolving within the global space sector?
That's a great question. I think from a policy perspective, let's take it one by one. From a policy perspective, we realize that the current laws in space, you have fragmentation in the laws that are there. They're outdated. They're not keeping pace with the technology. They're also not keeping pace with the commercialization aspects of space, because now you're seeing a lot more private industry getting into it and commercial aspects coming into it, even though there's still the defense portion. With that capitalistic mentality, these laws do not even give you any potential rule or guideline or enforcement. Because one of the main issues I see in space policy and law is the lack of enforcement. And so that needs to change, because you're going to have more and more actors in space. And we really need to drive that policy and regulatory aspects further to be more mature and developed and keeping up with the pace of exploration and achievement in space.
Who should be the enforcement agency if you talk about that? Because that's a big debated topic in the space sector.
Absolutely. And at the workshop, this came up multiple times. Who regulates and who enforces? And there are some ideas out there. Some people feel, it should be this entity or that entity. It really remains to be seen. I don't want to necessarily spell it out as to who it is. We will spell it out and potentially make a recommendation as to how we think this should go. Because if I tell you I think it's this entity, but this entity is not interested in doing it, it really doesn't serve anyone. But one key element is who has leverage to enforce. That's one area. Because if you don't have leverage to enforce, then you can't really enforce. So you have to be very tactful in how you select the entity that enforces the rule. And so you could potentially have multiple entities feeding into the regulatory policy, but then one that actually enforces because it has leverage. And that's what you need to do in order to move it forward and really have laws in which someone breaks the law. There is an implication to what you've done, and there is a accountability associated with it. And so that is the direction I would like for us to go, is to really push the policy and regulatory so that it is enforceable, that everybody agrees that this is the right direction we need to go, and we move forward just like we have laws currently on Earth. And then when we look at technology, based on my technical background, I am well aware of a lot of technologies that have received fickle funding. So one minute they're funded, next minute they're not. And so the progress of this technology is very slow, and its technology readiness level is also low. And so my goal with the center is that we push these technologies forward, because if we had them, these are the kind of opportunities that we can open up for everybody. And that's where I would like to see the matching between the developers and the investors happening, to have a higher rate of educated investors that can come in with the appetite for risk and long-term type investment to push the envelope when it comes to innovation in space. And to do so, obviously, cost effectively, because at the end of the day, you need to make money. So if we can bridge that gap and push these technologies, I think we will be in a much better place. Then when it comes to the cross-sector collaboration, which also can lead to emerging space countries being connected to well-established space countries or countries that don't have an interest in space, then we basically showcase to them the types of solutions to their problems that could be facilitated by space technologies, and then bridge that gap. Then we're connecting countries that don't have access to space to the ones that can provide that access to them, and then they can grow. Because the whole point of space is that it needs to be inclusive and everybody can benefit from it. That's in terms of the country aspect of bringing in non-space countries expertise to access the benefits of space. And the cross-sector portion is to try and capitalize on local expertise and bring it into space, because the activities are just tremendous and they will grow tremendously from here on out. And we will need those expertise. These non-space sectors most likely are not even aware that we need them in space. And so by having that awareness, we're opening it up and creating pilot projects associated with those types of relationships.
I think the goals you just mentioned are really big ones. And we see, not that they are new, but we see how slow this process is. And when you talked about supporting companies that are not in space right now, that's something where the UNOSA is very active in their programs. And on the venture side or the investment side, we see this slowdown in investments over the last years. And this, I would call it, the fantasy is out. We are coming to really show us business plans, show us the reality where we are, and not just glossy pictures of how the future might look like. So I really admire that these are very big stakes to work on. Very good. Anything to add from your end on that, or?
I think really long term, I would like to see some R&D done at the center. Initially, I don't think that should be our focus, because we're establishing the center, getting the center credible, getting the support of the space community, sharing our knowledge with the space community, and also developing relationships with the institutions or government bodies and so forth. But then eventually, in the long term, I would like to see innovation coming out of the center, whether it's through research and development to develop technology and hardware. I think that would be an ideal situation.
Building the right team for center and for anything is critical to success, as we, I think, all can agree. At the Connecting the World from the Skies event, you had a panel with your board members. So how are the board members' advisors being selected, and what criteria are you prioritizing to ensure the center's leadership represents diverse expertise and perspectives?
So we wanted to bring in a diverse group. When I say diverse, I really mean diverse. It's not just the areas that they're focused on. For example, we have an economic background. We have space, obviously. And then we also have on the entrepreneurship side a representation, as well as on the government side. As our chairman is the CEO of the Saudi Space Agency, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Tamimi. Also from space actors, the ones that develop technologies like Neospace Group. And so to get their perspective from a satellite operator and developer, and then also from an innovative space side, which is where Cam Ghaffarian comes in with Axiom, Quantum Space, and X Energy and all the companies that he owns. So their perspectives coming in from a global space perspective and economic perspective helps drive the center and think differently. Because sometimes being a technical person, you focus on some things, but then it's good to have feedback from a board membership that is diverse when it comes to the economic portion, the space portion, the business portion. And you also have to include the challenges and the pains that they go through. And we have to incorporate that and address them. Because, for example, when you look at the satellite industry, we get Neospace Group's perspective. Whatever pain and challenges that they have will feed into this. When we look at Susmita and the entrepreneurship side, as well as the space technology and space, she has like this space entrepreneurship element that comes in. Then you look at, okay, how can you be innovative and how can you bring in that entrepreneurship aspect into it? When you look at innovative companies like Axiom, Quantum Space, and you try to get their perspective in and the pains that they go through, as well as the government agency perspective into it, then you start to see things from very different viewpoints. And that helps push the agenda for the center.
One of the elements we can read on your website is the engagement with the industry. And for professionals and companies in the space industry, what pathways or programs will the center offer to collaborate, to become actively involved in its initiatives?
You're talking about like initiatives with other...
How can someone from the outside collaborate with the center? Maybe a company or an individual?
It's quite easy, really. You contact us. So depending on what the topic is or what the interest is, we can address it. So if it falls under any of the three categories I mentioned, it's automatic a possibility for moving forward, whether it's a consulting company that's interested in a specific thing, or whether it's a university that are interested in something, or whether it's on developing an index of some sort with a university and other entities like a research institution. So we're very open to collaboration because, let's face it, the whole point of space is to collaborate to develop something. And for it to be robust, you need as much input as possible. So the stakeholders are very critical for us to move the agenda for the center forward.
So you don't have a specific area where you say, okay, if you're a robotics company, then we need you. So it's really wide and you let the market come with ideas. So you are not requesting ideas or you're not proposing ideas to the market, right?
We are actually. So for example, for the policy piece, right now we're looking at a lot of contribution from either space actors, so satellite operators, even agencies, as well as government institutions, research institutions, and different people that will benefit from de-risking the space economy through tackling space debris from a policy perspective. So that is already out there, and we've already called on to different stakeholders. When we look at technology, we're already in communication with some universities and some venture capital companies to try to bring that forward because they have an interest. And so we also have expertise in certain technologies that we already had conversations with. We reached out to some of them, and some of them, as a result of some connection, reached out to us. And so that's how we start this type of collaboration or ideas. But sometimes we had to go to the market and be like, hey, we're looking at this topic. Who's interested in having a discussion about it? And so we have a discussion just to see who's interested and how they're going to basically collaborate with us, or maybe they won't. And we also reached out to a university to look at how do we create indices for space that the space industry can benefit from.
Okay. So but in general, you're open for anyone's idea just to connect you or contact you.
Worst case scenario, if there's no alignment or if it's something that we need to do not this year but next year, at least we have them in our network.
So what are the immediate next steps? The center begins its operation. And so what are the key things to move that now forward the next 12 months?
The reason why we focused on the space debris issue now is because it's, in my opinion, the biggest risk to the space economy right now. And so we need to tackle it. And we hear a lot about space debris, space junk, all that. But I'm not seeing action forward. And that's what I would like to do with the center is push it to action. Let's get this done. How do we do it? Let's get everybody in the same room. Let's move forward. We don't want to talk about it. We want to move forward.
Do you get everyone in the same room?
We tried, certainly, at the workshop, and we had really good...
The white elephant in the room is SpaceX and Starlink in that. And we talked the last days about them, but have they been present? Are they part of the conversation right now?
We didn't have SpaceX specifically in the room, but also keep in mind that the workshop was under Chatham House rules, so I can't really tell you who was there or not, but I can tell you in general, there was representation from the satellite industry, multiple representations from the satellite industry, especially ones that have constellations. So the idea is even SpaceX would want to operate in a sustainable manner because eventually they will hurt themselves if they don't. And so I think they are doing, in my understanding, yes, they're sending a lot, but they're doing so in a way that they will decommission the ones that fail, essentially, or the ones that get to their expiration and then they remove them. And they're doing a pretty good job at coordinating them. We have contacts, but the idea of the workshop is you have to understand, like sometimes people can't make it because of the date or whatever, but the conversation is much larger. For example, the physical workshop happened on the 25th, but we plan to have a virtual one where we include even more participation, where we share what happened at this workshop and what the outcomes were, and then address some new input from a larger group. So the goal is to get everybody in the room, but sometimes you're not going to get every single one, but you try your best, and then you make the recommendation, and then you share it with everybody, and then they can endorse it and say, yeah, you know what, I actually agree with some of this stuff. I'm going to try to implement it, whether on a national scale, like each country will be like, okay, I'm going to mandate this, or each company will be like, oh, you know what, I like these ideas, I'm going to start implementing them. And then eventually finding the solution of who's the regulator and who's the enforcer. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're not, or a combination of stakeholders, or let's say a steering group that can create the regulation, and then an enforcer that has leverage, as I mentioned earlier. And that's basically how you move it forward, is identifying who's going to enforce, who will be the committee that develops the actual policies. We get everyone on board, you move forward after that.
China had a seat on the table. I'm quite sure you invited them.
Yeah.
Have they been present as well? That's good. That's great to hear. Help me to understand one thing. This initiative, particularly on space debris, is absolutely great, without any doubt. But we do have the UN with the long-term sustainability guidelines adopted by consensus and now waiting for implementation in the most countries. We have the space sustainability rating and a number of other initiatives, or Zero Debris Charter by ESA. We have the Astro Charter by the UK, and so on and so forth. So there are at least a handful plus of initiatives. So how do you leverage the center's initiative with all the others?
We're meant to synergize. So our recommendation, because each of these are really national efforts, right? And so they try to implement it within their jurisdiction. What we're trying to do is on a global scale, like everybody will mandate this sort of thing. Obviously, we can't mandate because we're not an authority to mandate. We can make recommendations. But once you make that recommendation and get the stakeholders buy into these ideas, then they start to enforce it and then have a legal implication and accountability if you don't follow these rules. So that's really where we're headed. This is a legally binding agreement in which if you want access to space, you need to have these things in place. That's the movement that we're trying to achieve. Because when you look at space debris, it's twofold, two elements that you're focused on. Existing debris and then the creation of new debris. In my opinion, the creation of new debris is honestly a very simple solution. You want to put a satellite into space, you better have a decommissioning plan. And you must ensure against the failure of this decommissioning plan. So if it fails, it needs to be ensured so that you make sure that this stuff is taken out.
What SpaceX and FAA are pushing forward. Yeah.
You actually see today the FCC and even India having this 5-year plan if this stuff needs to be decommissioned in 5 years. So that's a great move for a creation of new debris. Now, the question is, how do you tackle existing debris? And so in my opinion, that's the hardest piece, is how do you tackle existing debris? And then it seems logical to remove the larger objects first because the technology right now is not ready to pick up the tiny pieces. So let's pick up the bigger pieces first and remove them. There are many different ways you can do this. And so these will hopefully be stipulated in the paper once we do a deep dive into the research and the possibilities of implementing these different solutions.
Okay. Saudi's Vision 2030 places a strong emphasis on innovation and economic diversity here in the kingdom. How does the Center for Space Futures contribute to these national priorities, and what role play in fostering talent and creation of new opportunities in and for the kingdom?
So while the center is a global hub, we are based in Saudi Arabia, so we will have a direct effect on these. When it comes to innovation, pushing technology readiness levels for space technology forward, that eventually will trickle down into exposing the workforce that we have at the center to these technologies and getting them to have more expertise in these technologies to make sure that the space community benefits from them. In doing so, you are expanding the know-how and the understanding, and you're expanding the human capital skill set. So that directly feeds into Vision 2030. And then when it comes to global positioning, the center is meant to bridge the gap and the issues because we are impartial. We have no agenda to drive. Our goal is to focus on the space community as a whole. So we are a bridge between East and West, which is what is critical. So we are basically bringing in East and West to the same table so that we can iron out all the issues, and we don't have an agenda except that we are interested to grow the space economy and ensure its sustainability for all space players.
Is space cool here for the generation to come in Saudi, or is it just one-off?
I think absolutely. You're asking the wrong person because
you're biased.
Yeah. I've loved space since I was 6. I knew exactly what I wanted to do because I looked up to the stars when my mom took me out to the desert in Qasim. And I was mesmerized. And I knew that is my calling, is to become an engineer, make rockets, advance space technologies, and push technologies as much as I can, which is why I always get into emerging space technologies, and space nuclear power and propulsion is something that I absolutely am passionate about. And so I constantly want to grow that. In addition, obviously, I had to live outside of Saudi for practically all my life. And then when Saudi started to be interested in space, I wanted that growth to happen here because they are capable and they have an amazing talent of human resources. They just need to be exposed to space and get the skill sets necessary in space. And you can actually open it up tremendously.
Mishaal, thank you very much for your time, and we wish the center all the best and happy to help whenever needed.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you have further questions reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.